grade 7s, good day. I believe you are well and you are safe. As today we are having our lessons right from home, we are going to look at the concept of graphs. Before we look at so in graph work, what we should take home or what we should understand by the end of our lesson, it's how to read and how to interpret graphs. So the key terms or the three things that we must take away today is our title or topic. What is the title or the topic in any graph work? What is the dependent variable? What is the independent variable? If you master these three things, our life is going to be very easy. Now, I want to ask a very simple question. What pops in mind when you hear of the word graph? What comes in mind? I know we may think of many things, but just try think of what are some of the things that are popping in mind right now as you hear of graph, or when you see this right now, what is coming into mind? You did this in grade 6, you did different types of graphs in grade 6. You can even give some examples of the different types of graphs that we have. So you in grade 6 you looked at pie charts. I believe now you do remember you looked at pie charts, you looked at line graph, you looked at this is a line graph, an example of a line graph. You looked at a bar graph or a bar chart, which is also known as a bar chart. You looked at the histogram, and many other graphs that you did. So the pie chart was the circle, the one that we have a circle with divisions in that order. That was your pie chart, looking at Debonair's pizza. Then you did the line graph, an example is shown here. You also looked at the bar graph, looking like that, where we have our data in bars in that order. Then you also looked at the histogram, and the histogram looks like this, similar to the bar graph, but for the histogram, the bars are joined. You see, the bars are together. There are no spacing like the bar graph. That's the difference between the histogram and the bar graph. Okay, so this is just a recap of what you guys did in the previous grades. In grade 7, as we introduce our topic graphs, we are only looking at the introductory parts, how to identify the key parts today. That is all what we are doing today. Okay, so looking at this line graph I've drawn here, it represents a candle, and the candle is burning. Yeah, you can see my candle burning here. It's very nice one. Okay, all right, so the candle is burning here, and it's taking some time to burn out completely. See, it started when it was 18. This is the length of the candle. The whole length is 18 centimeters, and it gradually reduced to 15 centimeters, 12, 9, 6, 3, up till it completely finished burning. Now, looking at the length of the candle here, the whole length of the candle, and the time it's taking to burn out completely, which one is depending? Which of these two labels is depending on the other? Do you think the length of the candle is depending on the time taken to burn, or the time taken to burn is dependent or is depending on the length of the candle? I give you 5 seconds of thinking time, and I want you to think carefully of that, and now we continue. So we can see that when the length of the candle was 18 centimeters, the candle had not started burning, so it was the full length here. Now, when the length decreased to 15 centimeters, the time it took for it to burn from 18 centimeters to 15 is now 2 minutes. The time is in minutes here. Now, when the time was 4 minutes, the length of the candle at that time was what? 12 centimeters. So what are we deducing here? What are we like trying to get here? As the candle burns in certain time or in certain minutes, then the length decreases. Therefore, the length is dependent on the time taken. Do you realize that? If the candle burns to 9 centimeters we have here, at what time will that be? That will be 6 minutes. So if the candle keeps burning for 6 minutes, the length will now be half of it, 9 centimeters. Okay, so I want to ask you, at what minutes would a candle burn to 3 centimeters? For the candle to burn from 18 to 3 centimeters, it should burn for how long? For how many minutes? It's very simple. When you look at the graph, you trace from 3 centimeters. So you get to the line, you bring it down, and that is what? 10 minutes. That's how we read the graph. As simple as that. So when the candle burns for 10 minutes, the length will now be what? 3 centimeters. Almost finished in length. So my first question was, is the length of the candle depending on the time taken? For the length to reduce, is it dependent on the time taken, or the time taken is dependent on the length of the candle? That is something you can now realize, that for the length of our candle to reduce from 18 to perhaps 15 here to 12 to 9 is depending on how long it is burning. Therefore, this whole thing here, length of the candle, is dependent on the time taken for it to burn. Therefore, we call this side, the length of the candle, we call it the dependent variable. So the dependent variable is the variable that depends on the other one in the analysis of data. So in graph work, when you talk of graph, it simply means the representation of two variables. The variables are what? The dependent variable and the independent variable. So a graph simply shows us the representation of two variables, which are the dependent variable and the independent variable. Why do we now call the time taken here? Let me change this. The time taken, why do we call the time taken the independent variable? Simply, it doesn't depend on the length of the candle. It is rather the length of the candle that depends on the time taken. Therefore, this is our independent variable. This is our dependent variable. How can we always identify our dependent and independent variable? Can you look at this line? Using the 4-point compass, if I draw the 4-point compass here, north, south, our east, and our west, this line corresponds to which of the lines here? Can you think of that? Very simple. It corresponds to the north and the south. So this line here runs from the north to the south. Therefore, our dependent variable in any graph work, such as this, can be seen on the vertical line. This is the vertical line running from the north to the south. Our independent variable is always found running from our west to east or east to west, which is our horizontal line. So always you can find your independent variables on the horizontal line. You can find your dependent variables on the vertical line. So keep that in mind. So you can write dependent variable found on the vertical line. Independent variable, I just said it, found on what? The horizontal line. You can write this down in your books. Okay, if you can see horizontal well, is HORIZONTAL, horizontal line. Now, in any graph work, I will explain this further when we get to that section of our topic graphs. But for now, for any graph work, the vertical line, which is also our dependent variable, it represents what we call the x-axis. Sorry, the y-axis. So our y-axis here represents the dependent variable. So there are three things you should take here. The dependent variable is found on which line? Vertical line. It's found on which axis? The y-axis. So the y-axis, dependent variable, vertical line are all referring to the same line. Get it? Got it? Great. The independent variable. Now we know the two. Independent, horizontal, and it's found on the x-axis. I said I'll explain the axis further when we get to that section, but for now, keep that. So the three things for the independent variable of this line here is, it is called the independent variable. It is our horizontal line and it is our x-axis. Get it? Got it? Great. So that is the objective for today. The title of the topic of our graph here is this: the time taken for a candlestick to burn. Always whenever you draw your graph, it should have a title underlined neatly like mine. So make sure you underline your topic, or you have a topic underlined. Make sure you write your dependent variable in your graph work at this side. So the numbers here, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18 in centimeters represent our length of candle, which is our dependent variable. Does that make sense? Great. So our dependent variable should always be written here. Your independent variable should always be written here. So these numbers, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, are our independent variables. Now, when I ask you to name when I draw this graph down, then I randomly ask, which variable represents our independent variable? You shouldn't say 2, 4. Yes, these are our independent variables, but together, how do we call 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12? We call them what? The time, the total, the thing written here, the time taken in minutes. So you copy everything here down as your independent variable. You don't just give the numbers. If you're asked to identify your dependent variables, what are you going to say? You're not going to give me random numbers here. You are going to mention what is written here. If you're asked to identify the topic of your graph or the title of your graph, you are going to say time taken for a candlestick to burn. Does that make sense? Great. So these are the three main parts of a graph: the title of the topic, the dependent variable, the independent variable. The last feature you should always also note is an arrow you are seeing here. This arrow is very important in graph work. Whenever you draw a graph like this, make sure you put your arrow down there on the x-axis or on your independent variable or on your horizontal line. When you come to the y-axis here, you also need to put an arrow. What is the meaning of the arrow here? The meaning is that this spans till infinity. We can keep on listing our numbers till any large number we are looking for. We can prolong or continue with our graph upwards till our book gets finished. Till any number that we can get to. All right, so today's lesson focused on graphs. And what did we say a graph was? A graph is a representation or any diagram that shows dependent and independent. If you're able to mention these two variables, that a diagram showing dependent and independent variable, then you're going to get your marks for definition of graph. What are the main parts of a graph? We have listed them here. The title of the topic, dependent, independent, your arrows at the end of your axis, very important. Great. Now I want you to work out this in your book.